So 2 years ago, my art used to look like this, but now it looks more like this, which means it's time for an updated coloring tutorial. I use the word tutorial very loosely here because I got sidetracked a lot, so it's not very organized. But anyway, I actually drew myself for once, and I'm gonna go from this to this. And hopefully you will too if you can manage to digest whatever excuse of a tutorial this is. So first things first, make sure that your lines have some type of texture to them, or else this first step isn't really gonna work for you, because I call it the pin light trick, and it's just not gonna show up if your lines don't have a variety in opacity or texture. And I will be listing all the brushes that I use in the description and how to get them. So if you're wondering, please check the description. So for the pin light trick, first you're gonna duplicate your lines or sketch or whatever you have. And then you're gonna clip the top layer to the bottom layer. Alright? Second, we're gonna set that bottom layer to pin light. And then third, you're gonna color that bottom layer some type of reddish color by turning on alpha lock and either manually coloring it in or filling it in with the bucket tool, or a shortcut like Control F if you're using speedpaint. And then there you have it. That is basically it for the pin light trick. If your lines are textured, then you should see a very nice reddish bloom to your line art. If you don't see anything and you're like, whoa, what happened? Nothing's happening. Then that's probably because your lines don't have enough texture to them. They're a little bit too hard. As you can see here, this is what it's supposed to look like with a very textured brush. And then this is how it looks like with a non-textured brush like Micron or something, or just like a normal round brush. It's not going to show up very well. So that's the pin light trick, but because I'm a little bit extra, I will take it a step further by also changing the color of the top layer to a very, very dark gray instead of black. And I like to sometimes add a green hue to that too. And I do this because I like to manually reintroduce black later on in the process instead of keeping it right now. And I usually just do this by feel. Sometimes I don't change this color and I keep it black, but up to you, you know, go with your vibes. And now we're done with the pin light trick and we're ready to color. I don't really have a method for picking colors. I kind of just start with something and then I adjust it until it looks good. And this piece really isn't a good example because I just color picked from this little avatar that I'm using as a reference. So you're not gonna get to see me kind of figure out the colors, but generally I like to keep skin tones warm and golden. My brain just doesn't like to work with neutral or cool skin tones. I think I'm just so built for warm hues that I end up making anything else ashy, so I tend to avoid those. And then usually I base the rest of the colors off of the skin tone, because if it looks good with the skin tone, then we should be good, you know? And with the flats, I tend to manually color the skin and clothes in with just a brush, but with the hair, because there's so many sharp points and edges and curves and stuff, I've found it pretty annoying to do that with a brush. So I've been using the quick lasso fill tool to do the hair. It just makes my life so much easier. But this tool isn't on speedpaint by default, but it is free on the asset store, so you can get it from there. I will link it in the description. So when it comes to the sclera, or the white parts of the eyes, I don't like to make them completely white because it is very intense and harsh on the piece, I think, especially as skin tones get darker. So what I do instead is I'll take the skin tone that I currently am using and I'll just slide it over to the gray part. And that just helps it look more together, if that makes sense. So after flats, the first thing I do is lay down some basic shading on the skin. And you're probably wondering, how do I pick what color to use for the shading? And this is really where the pinlight trick does its magic, because you can just zoom in and color pick from the tinted lines that the pinlight trick gives you. And then, voila. You have a pretty good color to use as your shader now, or for blush, or for lipstick. So I'll do that. I'll zoom in and color pick from the pinlight trick. And then I'll just take that color and start putting it in places and, can I just follow the vibes? I don't really do dramatic lighting by default. I just do some boring old head-on lighting. And so it's just like flat, I guess. And I usually head for the cheeks and the eyes and the lips and the nose, and I'll just put that color in those places. And if you don't really know what to do here, like where to put the shading, and if you don't have a specific light source like I do, you can just kind of follow the general shape of the face, We've all seen the diagram of the planes of the face. And you can just put your shading on the default areas that there's going to be shadows on the face, like, the eyelids or under the nose or on the side of the cheeks. And as you can see, I didn't really do much before moving on. I basically just added blush and shaded the eyes, nose, and lips. And I don't think I even changed the color that I was using because I didn't really need to. And it looks pretty boring right now, but that's because I'm gonna add way more things later on once I start painting. So in this part, I guess I got a little distracted and started to do stuff with the hair, and I changed the shade to be what I actually wanted it to be. Then I realized that the pinlight trick wasn't really having the effect that I wanted it to have on the hair, because the hair is very dark. And so that means the colors on the pinlight layers also have to be darker. So I created a selection out of my hair layer, and then I use that to change the colors on my pinlight layers. And now they just show up better, they just were too light before. And then I move on to reintroducing black in the lines on the eyes. And when I do this, I very much make sure that the layer that I'm on is still alpha locked. So that top black layer, it needs to still be alpha locked, because if it isn't, and then you try changing the color of it by manually doing it, you're gonna end up getting rid of your tinted lines, which is no good because you work so hard to get those tinted lines, so you don't want them to go away. After making the entire eye black, I'll make a new layer on top of everything. It's going to be on top of everything. And that's because this is my rendering layer. Sometimes I like to call this my overpainting layer too, because it's just easier to understand what's going on there. Nowadays, when I color eyes, I'll make them a dark color and then I'll add a little squiggly of whatever color they're actually supposed to be. And that's because if I draw them like how actual eyes are, where it's color and then black people in the middle, my art will look like the meme of Miley Cyrus having blue eyes, and I want to avoid that. So I've just kind of been doing like the opposite, where the eye is black and then there's like a little like squiggly of color, And then for the highlight, instead of making it a singular white dot, I will add some other type of saturated color in there too. And this time I chose yellow, but sometimes I'll use red or like a hot pink or blue, maybe even all of them. It just depends on what I think might look good at the moment. And then after that, I begin the process of painting over things to make them look more blended into the piece. A lot of digital artists call this rendering, but honestly, I kind of prefer to call it overpainting because when people hear rendering, they all think of like different definitions, but when you hear overpainting, it's kind of just one definition. And during this process, I'll just keep color picking from those tinted lines until I get the color that I want. And the pinlight trick isn't perfect, by the way. Sometimes I won't get the color that I want, and then I'll have to manually adjust it on the color wheel to be what I need. But the pinlight trick definitely saves time. So I'll take those colors and I'll start outlining the dark lines, because if these lines are just black like how they are right now, in my opinion, it's too harsh. And doing this just helps it blend into the skin, because I want these lines to look like they're part of the skin instead of just sitting on top of it. So I do that. And then this is kind of where things get disorganized, because I just kept jumping from place to place on this face. Like I was working on the eyes, and then now I'm randomly working on the nose, and then later on I do something else. So in this part, the harsh black line on the nose bridge was bothering me. So I went to it and then I lightened that black line to prepare myself to overpaint. And then I go back to that top layer and I start to mess around with how I can make this less harsh. So I pretty much paint over it, and then I'm trying to bring it back by adding some dimension to the nose bridge area, and also like extending the shading to the eyelid. I just think it made it look better because it was too harsh before. And here I also take the shading color that I was using, and then I went to my color wheel and I gave it a little bit more of a yellow hue, and then I placed it inside of the shading that I just did. And I like to do this just to create like slight variations of color here and there, just to, you know, make things interesting. Otherwise, if you use the same color everywhere, it would be a little boring. So after doing some stuff on like the lower eyelids here, I guess I decided that I wanted to work on the eyebrows. And so I guess we're talking about eyebrows now. So how I'll do this is I'll take the hair color and I'll start brushing it into the existing eyebrow. And just like the eyes, we want to blend that eyebrow into the skin. We want it to look like it's part of it. And so we'll take one of those pinlight colors and also start brushing that into the eyebrow along with the hair color. And this is to create the look that, you know, it isn't just a block of darkness on the face, but it also has parts where the skin is showing through and breaking through the hair, just like real eyebrows. Sometimes if I feel like it's not dark enough, I'll just go back in with black and I'll start adding that into the hair also. And you know, the motion of this and the act of cleaning up eyebrows is very much like actual makeup. You know, if you've ever filled in your eyebrows, you kind of know how to do it, and it's like, oh, you mimic the movement of the hair and stuff, and that is also how drawing eyebrows is. After doing the eyebrows, I guess I decided that the eyes felt a little bit too naked. So I wanted to add some makeup, some eyeshadow to these eyes. And the way I usually do that is making a new layer, setting it to multiply, and then just messing around with what I can do to make this look better. And I do this on a separate layer because it's something that I wasn't sure would make it look better. And so I didn't want to commit to it. It was a little scary, like, oh, what if I make them too intense and then I don't like how it looks? I don't want to do this on the overpainting layer and now have to commit to it. That's why I do it on a separate, like, multiply layer. And then after that, I just jump back to the nose again and start working on it again. Oh God, I'm so unorganized. Basically with the nose, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to make it less harsh by lowering the contrast of the nose area. My art is very low contrast. There's not a huge difference between values. I don't know why that is the case for me. It's just how I naturally do things. I am not a high contrast girly. And so that's what I'm doing with the nose. And same thing with the darker bits of the nose, those dark lines that are there on the nostrils. Same thing with the eyes. I will outline those lines with pinlight color just to make them look more blended into the nose, you know, part of the nose instead of some harsh lines on top of the nose. And then I noticed, hey, the skin is looking a little too low contrast, a little too flat. And so I decided to already add in my highlights. Sometimes I save the highlights for last, but this time around, I guess I got ahead of myself and I was like, I just want to see how it looks with the highlights already. And I always put the highlights in the corner, the inner corner of the eyes, on the cheek, and also sometimes next to the nose, just to kind of bring more dimension to the nose without like putting a harsh shadow on it. I would also do these like lines on the blush or the cheeks. This is something I learned from my favorite artist and I took it as inspiration. And honestly, I don't know why, but I just really like the effect that it gives. I know some artists actually, instead of doing lines, will do like a little squiggly. And I think that looks fun too. But you know, do what you like. You can do whatever type of lines you want. If you want lines, you know, you can do horizontal lines instead of slanted lines like me. You can do vertical lines or squiggles. Just do whatever you want. And now it's time for the lips. And the lips are pretty hard to explain. It's a whole lot of experimentation and improvisation. I don't really know what I'm doing, but the same thing with the dark lines on the lips though. I will usually paint over them with not so harsh of a color, and then I'll reintroduce the dark color later on. I know it's confusing. When I shade lips, I just try to think about the shape of the lips, you know, like how plump are these lips? How round are they? Are they a little flatter? But usually I will always make the top lip darker than the bottom lip. Sometimes simplicity is key. Sometimes if you add too much shadow to lips, they look a little like too intense and a little too plump. And this piece is taking a little bit more of a subtle look to it. So I try not to do too much. Now that I look at it, I actually don't like that I added a lot of shadow to the bottom lip. I kind of just wish that it was looking a bit more flat. And then I will try to blend some of the skin onto the side of the bottom lips. So kind of as like the finishing touches of the lips, I will usually outline the corner of the lips with some type of reddish color, usually the same color as the lips. And then I'll outline the top lip with one of my lighter shade colors on the skin. And then on the bottom, I will add that like very bottom shadow to the bottom lip. And then the last thing that I'll do around the skin is outline the parts that are touching the hair to once again make it look like things are blending together. Okay, so I'll just take one of my darker pinlight colors and I'll just go around the perimeter of the skin, you know, like the silhouette of it, and I'll make it blend into the hair. It just gets rid of those very harsh lines and turns them into more blended lines. And then along the way, if I feel like I got rid of some of the darker lines too much, I'll just add them back in. And with the hair, I tend to simplify hair and keep it flat for the most part. If we look at what I did in these other pieces, I pretty much just kept it simple. Like I just added a simple gradient and then some highlights. Like this one is also really simple with just literally some brush strokes and then other brush strokes for highlights. So we're gonna do that. And I'm gonna use this little avatar thing as a reference for the hair. So let's add some gradients to this hair. I'm gonna color pick a color that's a bit darker than the hair from my reference. And then I'm just gonna go around and create gradients at the bottom of the hair. And then I'm gonna go to like the top middle and just add in some dark brush strokes. And just to add a little spunk to this, I'm gonna color pick this greenish color from the hairline and I'm gonna add it into those brush strokes. And then, just like what we did with the eyebrows, I'm gonna take that lighter base color and just reintroduce it into what was just put down, you know, to create the look of hair. And I'm also going to add some hair-shaped shadows to the area where the hair parts, because that usually has some shadows there, right? And as you can see, while I'm doing this, I am constantly color picking and switching back and forth between the shadow color and the base color, and just kind of like, what's the word? Like, you know, like putting them back and forth into each other because that makes it look like hair. Then after that, I'm gonna sneak in some black where I think would be like the background of the hair, which is next to the neck. And that's basically what I do for base shading. And now that we're done with that, it is time to create an overpainting layer dedicated just to the hair. Now, the main thing that I'm doing here is pretty much just singling out chunks of hair that I want to be together. For example, this one is going to be the bangs. So I'm gonna kind of single it out and outline it and turn it into its own little chunk. And while I'm cleaning that chunk up, I'm also gonna finally cover the eyebrow. And then because I get sidetracked and I just like go to whatever I see, I'll also do this thing on the hairline where I'll make the scalp kind of like peek through the hair a little bit. And you know, it just helps make the hairline look less dense. Then I'm just going around and seeing which parts of the hair I can turn into chunks. And then for the highlight, I'm going to take some of that blue highlight from my reference and I'm going to add it onto where those darker bits of the hair were, so that the highlight, because it's next to a darker part of the hair, it'll pop out more. So with the same hair-like motions, I'm adding in the blue highlight, and as I go, if I see a part that I don't like, I'll just start painting over it and correcting it. And then that is pretty much the most detailed part done. And just so that the rest of the hair isn't boring, I'm gonna go around and add some more brush strokes in other areas. But because this part with the highlights is so detailed already, I'm just gonna keep things rough in other areas because that detailed part is the area that people are going to look at, you know? And so it gives me some leeway into keeping the other parts simple. So after I've reached a point where I'm kind of satisfied with it, it's time to merge everything. So I'm gonna put all the layers in a folder and then I will duplicate that folder and I'm gonna set aside one of those so that I have a backup. in case something goes wrong, because it's always nice to have a backup. And then I'll merge the other one into one layer. And now that everything is merged, I can go around and clean up the edges finally. And a specific thing that I like to do is making the corners of the hair darker. I don't know why I do this. It might just be a thing that I learned when doing like line art. I just think it looks nice. And another fun thing about cleaning up hair and having messy lines is that some of those stray lines, we don't have to erase them. Some of those stray lines I can just turn into a loose strand of hair. So yeah, I'll just go around and pick and choose which lines I want to erase and which ones I want to turn into strands of hair. I'm literally just like going around and whatever I notice that bothers me, I'm gonna go to it and just try to make it look better, messing around with it until it doesn't bother me anymore, just like painting over it and stuff. And I'm not really gonna do anything to the shirt or clean it up or anything because I'm lazy, and it's not really the centerpiece of this, so I can keep it the way it is. So like as I go around, I'm kind of thinking in my head like, oh, maybe I'll turn this whole chunk right here black so that it's in the background of the hair. And then now that things are merged, I can finally fix this piece of hair in the front that is like still pretty messy. And then just going around and examining, I saw this part where the hair and the neck was creating a tangent. So I'm going to cover up that tangent because it's bothering me. I'm just going to make this chunk of hair thicker. And, now it's out of the way. The tangent isn't bothering me anymore because I can't see it. And one of my last steps is that since we're merged into one whole layer, this is also where I can liquify. And liquifying is so fun because it's like that one step where you can finally just like fix certain parts that have been bothering you the entire time. Like this part of the hair felt really empty, and the entire time I was working on this, I just knew that once I started liquifying, I would push it this way or whatever, and then it would look better. And it does indeed look better. And while liquifying, I also went back to the nose and I kind of like added back the hump on my nose because I felt like it disappeared a little bit. And yeah, for the most part, this is done. The last finishing touches that I like to add are a couple of filters. So first, I will add a correction layer for brightness and contrast. And then I'll set the contrast to 25. And then I will set that correction layer to saturation. And it just like increases the saturation of the colors in a way that looks nice, but it is a little bit too intense, so I'm gonna bring the opacity down to 50. Then another thing I like to do is create a new layer, clip it onto my drawing, and then set it to brightness. And then I'm gonna fill the entire layer with like a medium gray color. It doesn't even really matter what color it is. And it just has like this cool effect to it that kind of like golden-ifies everything. But it's very, very intense. So I'm gonna bring that down to like literally 5 opacity. It's just like, like how the golden hour of like sunset kind of makes everything look just nice. That's kind of what that layer is doing. And if I zoom in here, you can see that the parts where I liquefied have gotten a little blurry, and I love a good crisp piece of art, so I will sharpen the entire layer just to bring back the texture and crispiness of it. And then lastly, I will hide my watermark somewhere. And now we are done. We did it. We made it. And oh my god, wow, that was a mess of a tutorial. Like, I don't even know if I can call it a tutorial because I was just yapping. I hope you learned a thing or two, at least, from watching this, if you survived. And if you followed along, I bet your art looks great because you're awesome. So yeah, thanks for being here and supporting my channel. I am gonna go rest my voice now and make some pizza. Goodbye!